was really appreciating what Alex was saying about this being this field, and we haven't really come together around a term for it. I've been calling myself a media artist, but I agree it kind of doesn't do justice to the genre. So I've been doing this work for about 8 years. I've been working mostly in installation and performance. For me, like what this kind of work is all about is presence, like really being physically with the work and having that imagery in a space and the presence of the viewer with the work, that it can't be separated. Embodiment can't be separated from the work. So I use the same techniques as a craft to make a living. I worked for studios like Obscure Digital and Leviathan and Fake Love and Bot and Dolly, and made a lot of media servers, projection mapping tools, real-time visuals. I just finished grad school last fall. Actually, it's been a year now, so I can't say just anymore. I went to SCI-Arc to do some spatial design and learn more about digital fabrication. And then this spring, I did an artist residency with Autodesk at Pier 9, working in digital fabrication. And this represents what I'm most interested in right now, I think, which is really combining fabrication and surface and geometry with digital content in a way that they become really inseparable. But for me, this spring was so much about fabrication that this doesn't really yield very interesting stuff to talk about in terms of touch designer. So I'm not going to get into it that much today, but I'd love to talk with you about it another time. Let's see. So I was thinking, when I was invited to do this meetup, I was like, oh wow, the last time that I was here, I presented this project, which was something I released 3 years ago. This is Rouge. It's a framework for making modular real-time video. I made it as a teaching tool. I'd been doing a lot of workshops teaching people touch design, and I wanted to give them a tool where they could, kind of start small, but still have a way to put their work on a projector without having to learn everything. So yeah, the heart of this is really this modular real-time video design and control with minimal generalized parameters. So this kind of reflects this philosophy that good software is simple and elegant and tailored to its context. And it was really nice. I started to get photos like this from people. This is this actually don't have to write. It's Coca-Cola, and I'm using this and it's great. And it was really heartwarming to get that kind of support and that response from our community. It's a worldwide community at this point, and I haven't really updated it that much, you guys. I'm sorry, but it's still an idea that is really valuable to me. So this summer I was tapped to make real-time content for Radiohead for their tour, and so their whole stage show is designed by Andy Watson, who's been doing their lighting design and stage design since their club days. And they have this incredible discography at this point. But he's been doing this for so long, but he's very much about this live manual control for all of his lighting and content. He never does press play shows, and particularly for Radiohead, they change their set list night to night when they go on tour. So he has to whip up a whole new look for Creep when they dust that off after years, So it was really an honor to be able to actually make this tool that is really, I think, perfect for this context and put it in his hands. So I was brought into this a month out, and we had to be able to tuck it into their whole show setup in one day at Madison Square Garden. So let's see. And then Andy's not a VJ, and he's really old school. He's a lighting designer, trained and has done this, for years. And so he controls everything from the lighting board from a grandma. And so I worked with a producer and technical director, and we had our media server kind of plug into this whole system that they already had. Right? They have they're pulling 12 feeds from the stage. They have a catalyst with some canned content. So it basically took Rouge and made a lighting profile for it for the grandma, right? So So instead of like having all of these parameters and this really complicated thing, I simplified it to just 12 DMX channels, so that Andy could control this, like include it in all of his lighting presets and all of his looks that fit right into his workflow. And so he could, whip up a new look and include this content in that. Control by apartment. This is from the manual that I gave to the assistant. So yeah, so kind of describing the different looks and the different like very lighting hardware based parameters that they have. So this looks and acts like a light to them. This is Andy. This is his 11 monitors that he uses to drive the show, and this is my content right here. So yeah, so that was like an incredibly heartwarming feeling, and it was like also this moment where I realized it was like, oh, I've been putting this idea out, and it took 3 years for it to get into the hands of like the right person, and so it's like it's very encouraging, and I encourage you all to like also keep pushing. So it might take a while for the right person to like learn about your work, and yeah. So for my demo, this is like nowhere near as advanced as Vincent's demo. This is like much more oriented towards like beginners and advanced beginners. Does anyone here identify as that? Because I'm going to be kind of bummed if everyone's like, no, we're all masters and we're all just writing shaders all the time. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so how to optimize your touch designer projects. So for those of you who are like, I'm way beyond all of this, just like enjoy this feeling of like smugness or nostalgia or like whatever it is for you. Just like bask in that, because you don't get to feel that all the time. So let's talk about computing. Yeah, so first off, I love this image. This is a programmer from like the 1950s. This is a pile not of cash, but of punch cards. This is over 60,000 punch cards. It's about 5 megabytes of data. Also look at its sweet shape. So when we think about, let's see, so backing up just for a second, I think something that I really like about Touch Designer is that it's accessible to people who maybe don't have a background in computer graphics or like even in programming at all, and maybe have a background in animation or a background in like 3D modeling or whatever, and I think that it's really exciting that this empowers people from these backgrounds that are not, as programming focused. And so this is for you. So you don't always have to think about like what is really happening under the hood or like your resources, but it can help sometimes to just to remember that they're there and maybe to look at them so that you can like manage, so you can manage them. And so if you're, like if you have too much stuff on your CPU, you can move to the GPU or like, just manage your RAM and everything like that. So these are going to come up. These are the tools in Touch Designer for checking on all of this. So if you don't know, you should know. You can access the performance monitor to analyze, like, for a given frame, like, what everything is kind of costing you computationally. Press middle mouse click on your operators, and you can use the perform chart to look at your frame time or how much GPU memory you're using. So my 5 tips for you today are, or areas to evaluate, are to check on your order of operations. And we're going to look at stops to stay, this is kind of obvious with them sometimes. We're going to look at buffers versus drawing for using your, mostly managing graphics memory. And then just kind of like to point out when people do things that are redundant, and like continuous versus event-based evaluation, and reminding you that you can actually bake out data and still use that in a real-time process. So, exit PowerPoint. Let's see. So my first example is one about order of operations. So surface operators, they're working on the CPU, and so they can be the most resource intensive. So when someone sends me a file and they're like, oh, it's running slow, like what can I do? The first thing that I look for is whatever they're doing with stops to check that. Let's see. So this is just an example where I'm taking, a mesh. This could be any mesh with, a significant number of points, and I'm using noise to and applying that to the point positions, and then doing some other surface operations. I'm transforming it. I'm deleting some different faces. But as you probably have already guessed, I could do these things upstream of the noise. And so if I consider my order of operations, I could calculate these other operations before doing this resource-intensive thing and kind of do the rather than doing this every frame, since it's not actually, it doesn't need to be done every frame. So kind of on the subject of talks as well, it's important to remember when just to think about any transformations, you can do them using the geometry component instead of using the transform surface operator. This is transforming this mesh on the CPU, whereas if I transform it using the transformation parameters of the geometry component, then it's happening in the render pipeline. Right, so that's the order of operations and SOPs example. This one is more about graphics memory and about buffering versus drawing. So it's easy to forget that that each of these little texture operators, it's a frame buffer, and so you're like holding all of that data in graphics memory, like every frame. And sometimes you don't actually need to hold on to it, right? Like so you can think about like what you actually need to hold on to in order to like process it, for example, versus what you can just like draw on top of each other. So let's say you have a video and you want to duplicate it out to like 4K. You could do that with texture operators and do a string of compositing, and then maybe also composite your frame onto there. And then at this point, let's look at this. We're using like about half of our graphics memory, but you can also just do that with containers, basically drawing windows within windows, and you don't need any of these operators, and we just saved ourselves like 300 megabytes of graphics memory. Let's see, so Replicator is wonderful for basically doing somewhat object-oriented work where you're making copies that are slightly different. In this case, I'm using it to make this kind of appearing and disappearing slit effect. And each replicant is a copy of this setup where I'm loading a video and I'm cropping it and kind of moving that cropped image around within the frame. But since they're all using the same video, I actually, and the same canvas to like move that within. They don't all need to load it. Those can be loaded outside of the replicants, and then that data can be like brought into each one rather than duplicating it over and over. So this is the one that doesn't duplicate that loaded data. It's not loading it in a dozen times. So that's about redundancy, and then this one is about evaluating things continuously versus evaluating them on an event. Let's see, so I went back to surface operators because they're kind of the most computationally expensive, and so it's the easiest way to demonstrate this. Let's see, so again have my mesh, but in this case, I can make the radius of the mesh dependent on a channel operator. I can make that dependent on a channel operator that is getting evaluated every frame, and you can see my frame rate just dropped. These spheres are being recreated every frame, and then the whole chain of computation that they feed into is also being calculated every frame. This is an expression that I'm evaluating so that, it's like our frame is before frame 200, then it's one radius, and it's after, then it's another radius. Very simple, right? It's just to demonstrate the idea. But I can instead have that trigger a script that changes the parameters. So rather than evaluating the operator every frame, I'm changing it only on the event that changes. So I'm going to make this active. So that, there's still like this occasional big hit, but it's not every single frame. Yeah, and then finally, I often will work in a way where I will develop these long chains of operators to like dial in exactly the look that I want, but then at the end of it, I don't actually need all of those steps, right? I've like parameterized something, I've worked it out. In this example, I've used surface operators to like generate this, this kind of like sculptural shape, and then I'm taking that channel data and I'm using it to create instances, and then I'm also generating some more data to change the scaling of those instances. But at this point, if I am not interested in changing this, if this is the look that I want, then I can ditch the surface operators and just save the channel data, just like save the chop. And then I can bring that in as data, and just get rid of everything upstream. And that could also be nice if you wanted to switch between data sets, for example. So just a reminder that you can bake out parts of your network and then load them in to reduce the amount of the operators that you're using. So pretty simple, just some areas to evaluate when you want it to go faster. Yes. Any questions?
You mentioned the slide reference versus export. Do you have a preference of one over the other? Because I tend to use reference because export is always really cumbersome to like connect and disconnect and
I'm with you on that. That's like a style.
Performance gain.
Yeah, I think there's a slight performance gain on exports. Ben, you'll have to tell us. But I also use references because I think it's more readable. It's like easier to edit. There's a few reasons that I prefer. I think that's stylistic though.
So yeah, I agree that references are much easier to use, but depending on how many parameters with the pencil, there is a performance issue.
Yes,
so
it's true.
I tend to use more and more exports, but then you have to be more careful how you manage.
So export is more
faster.
Especially if you're using Python references. If you use tscript, it's almost comparable, but if the Python is evaluating every frame, that Python evaluation takes longer than tscript.
Because it's doing searches. Every time you say op, it's like performing a search for the operator.
So if you have an expression that cannot put the frames static, it's totally fine. The other thing with references that can be a little bit dangerous, you start renaming parts of your system with references. Sometimes chop, if it's set up right, will say, hey, you rename this, you want to update that. And that will keep things connected. But it's just careful where you program.
But then with reference, you can, if you make a project in such a way, you can kind of like depend on relative reference that you can make it a little more modular, right?
Another question. Is Rouge running in the latest version of 88 now?
Yeah, I think that, in fact, I opened it on Mac. We've added the windowing feature for Retina, So I think I just need to update it to reflect that. Yeah, it still runs. Maybe I'll update it for real eventually. Lots of other things.
I just want to ask about experience thing, because I've done a lot of work with RNet, and I have a grandma in my house, and one of those nerds, I sit and I program. I have a lot of RNet issues with Touch Designer, and I'm curious if you guys ran into it. I've had, when I get up to, because my profiles end up at like 60, 70 channels, and I had to jump, like, if I have a channel selecting a file out of a DAT list, sometimes I'll literally see like one frame jump to a new file and come back. These like weird artifact things that don't happen with jitter on the same machine, and also I've had some LED stuff with some sending RNet out to TTV, driving LED stuff, where I was getting, if I go all to 0, getting sparkles of like blue channel, load the exact same TTV max jitter, totally clean, and I can't quite figure it out. Like what's going on? Is you experienced any of that stuff?
No, I haven't experienced any of that. Short answer.
We need to break down an example that we can look at. We can look at that for you. But ArtNet does sometimes flood the network if you have like thousands and thousands of channels. So that can be a network issue sometimes. But if you said it works in another package, then I would discount that. So.
Yeah, even changed like electrical layout of the system, trying to figure out if it was that, some of our built shutdowns and stuff. And then it turns out, and then a friend of mine was like, well, let's just go with jitter. And we loaded up a test start something on jitter, and it was clean and it was off. And for some reason with Touch, I didn't even like, it looks like data reflection or something.
With the LEDs, were you using image-driven stuff? It's always worth checking your bit depth on imagery. Sometimes, like, if you're doing fading and it's 8-bit, then you might not fade everything to 0.
An interesting thing too is if you're sampling tops to send out to your channels, by default tops are interpolated between pixels, so you don't get and they're sampled at a certain point from that pixel, so you don't get like the exact value you want. You can set tops to nearest pixel, and then you will get a solid color per pixel, and that is a better way of syncing it out. So whenever we do a top system, we always set to nearest pixel, so you don't have that information across.
I have not tried that.
So that might do something.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.